secret surrounding a single radiant cradle. Within it lay a child, an infant barely old enough to understand the fear in their eyes. She was the last hope of their kind, their final prayer to the universe. With the last of their power, they wove an incantation of exile, not to punish, but to protect. A swirling rift opened in the fabric of reality, and with a whispered blessing, they sent the child through, away from the devastation, away from the end. The portal closed. Elindria fell silent, far across the cosmos, beneath an ordinary sky. The child's small vessel streaked like a falling star, descending into the quiet embrace of an unfamiliar world. The villagers who saw it that night mistook it for a passing comet, nothing more than a fleeting wonder in the heavens. But for one struggling couple, that night would change their lives forever. Heron and Lila, humble farmers on the outskirts of a small village, had spent years yearning for a child of their own. Life had not been kind to them, and though their hearts were full of love, their hands were often empty. When they stumbled upon the strange, glowing cradle deep in the woods, they were filled with both awe and fear. Inside, wrapped in silken fabric, unlike anything they had ever seen, was a baby girl. Her eyes shimmered, not with the dull, sleepy gaze of a newborn, but with something ancient, something knowing. They named her Xena, a name meaning gift of the stars in their native tongue. Though they never understood where she had come from, nor why the sky seemed to whisper when she laughed, they loved her as their own. She grew up chasing fireflies in the fields, learning to weave baskets with her mother, and listening to her father's stories by the fire. Yet, as the years passed, strange things began to happen around her. Flowers bloomed in her footsteps even in the dead of winter. The wind seemed to carry her laughter farther than it should. And in the darkest moments, when she was afraid or alone, the very air around her would hum with an energy neither seen nor explained. The villagers whispered. Some called her blessed, others cursed, but Heron and Lila simply called her their daughter. Xena knew nothing of Elindria, nothing of the great power buried deep within her. But fate is never so easily denied. One day, the past would come calling. One day, she would have to face the truth of who she was. And when that day arrived, the last daughter of a forgotten world would rise again. Xena believed she was just like any other child in her quiet village. At 12 years old, she woke at dawn to help her parents on the farm, ran through the meadows with her friends, and studied under the watchful eye of her teacher, Old Master Ever. But deep down, she sensed something was different. For as long as she could remember, she had never been sick, not even with a simple cold. She never scraped her knees, never bruised her skin, and never once felt the sting of pain. When she first noticed this, she thought she was simply lucky. But luck couldn't explain what happened the day she fell from the cliffs. It had been an ordinary afternoon, filled with laughter and games. She and her friends had been playing near the rocky ledge outside the village, daring one another to get as close as possible. Xena had never been one to back down from a challenge. But the moment her foot slipped, she realized too late that she had gone too far. She plummeted down the jagged cliffside, her friends' screams echoing in her ears. She should have died. Instead, she landed at the bottom, unscathed. The pain never came. No broken bones, no cuts, no bruises, just the stunned silence of her friends staring at her from above. That was the moment she knew something was wrong. But it wasn't just the fall. There was the fire, too. One night, a terrible blaze tore through her home. The villagers gathered with buckets of water, desperately trying to put out the inferno. Her parents cried out for her, believing she was lost inside. But when the flames finally died down, she stepped out from the wreckage, completely unharmed. Her clothes were untouched, her skin as cool as ever. The whisper spread like wildfire. At first, Xena tried to hide it. She forced herself to pretend she felt pain, to act afraid when she fell. But the village wasn't fooled for long. People started treating her differently. Some children feared her, whispering about dark magic and curses. Others idolized her, calling her invincible, daring her to do reckless things, like stand in the middle of a stampede or hold her hand over an open flame. Some simply used her. A group of boys began placing bets on what she could survive. They pushed her too hard, too far, but she never complained. How could she? She wanted to fit in. She wanted to be normal. But no matter how hard she tried, she was always different. Then, something worse happened. It started as an ordinary morning. Xena sat in class, staring at the equations on the board, barely paying attention. The air was thick with the usual whispers about her, the stolen glances, the sideways stares. But she had learned to ignore them. Then, a scream shattered the silence. A group of older boys had cornered a younger child outside the school. They were taunting him, shoving him against the wall, demanding he hand over his lunch. The boy, small and frightened, had tears in his eyes. Xena clenched her fists. She had seen cruelty before, but something inside her stirred, something deeper than anger, something older than her own understanding. "Leave him alone," she said, stepping forward. The leader of the group, a tall boy named Auric, sneered. "Or what? You'll survive another fall." His friends laughed, but Xena didn't flinch. "Last warning," she said, her voice steady. Auric lunged at her. He was stronger, bigger, but as soon as his hand grabbed her shoulder, something happened. A shock wave burst from her body. The air around her shimmered, bending like heat on a summer road. Auric was thrown back, crashing into the schoolyard fence with a force no human should have possessed. The ground beneath Xena cracked. Silence. Everyone stared. Fear filled their eyes. Even Auric, groaning as he tried to stand, looked at her as if she were a monster. Xena looked at her hands. They were glowing, faint but undeniable. She had no idea what she had just done. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't normal. She never had been. And now there was no hiding it. The night the sky turned red, the world as Xena knew it ended. The village slept under a moonless sky, unaware of the doom marching toward them. Then, the first horn sounded, a deep, haunting note that sent shivers through the air. Moments later, fire rained down. Arrows streaked through the sky like falling stars, igniting rooftops, tearing through homes. The screams began. A massive army swept through the village, soldiers clad in black armor, their banners bearing the sigil of a crowned wolf. At the front of it all, on a horse as dark as the night, rode King Razi, the warlord who had conquered a dozen kingdoms, whose thirst for power knew no limits. He was a man who feared nothing, for he believed all things could be broken or bent to his will. And he had come for Xena, the girl who cannot die. His voice echoed through the burning village. "Surrender her, and I will spare the rest." Xena stood frozen in her home, her mother clutching her hand, her father gripping a rusted sword he had no chance of wielding against the invaders. "This is my fault," Xena whispered. Her parents' eyes were full of love, but also of fear. Not for themselves, for her. She had two choices: run and hide, living in fear forever, or stand and fight. She looked out at the village.